What's up, guys? Welcome back to the channel and more Birthright for you. So we're moving on and covering the final phase of the Birthright setting as far as playing campaigns and being a regent are concerned, and that's actually going to war. So we'll have a separate series of videos on the campaign play at large, the sort of the high-level stuff, but wanted to start today and focus on the actual individual battles and how that plays out in the game. Now, you can certainly come up with your own system, use miniatures, whatever you want to do, but all the way back in 95, Birthright had another surprise for you basically in the starter box, and that is this giant battle map with its own pretty in-depth rule system on how to govern these battles between players' armies. And, there's tons of unit cards. We'll take a look at those as well. That came with the base game, so quite a bit of stuff there. We'll cover all the different kinds of units that you get there. Oops, got some baddies poking out the bottom. We did also get, although ours is beat up because we've been using it for like 30 years, just about, a war chest box to keep all those things in. So I might have to see if we can find a newer one on eBay. But yeah, so you have tons and tons of these, and a lot of the expansions also added additional war cards, and there's even an expansion, which we'll get to at some point, for naval battles. So you have, your navies and your ships and all that, and boarding actions. So really in-depth stuff. So just one of the other things that really makes this setting so fun for me, and why I think it's one of the best ones. So we'll briefly take a look here at the description of the war cards, but then we'll switch and show you guys how that actually works in playing it instead of just looking at the book here. So each company in a battle is represented by a single war card, with the exception of certain units like castles, fortified holdings, etc. So we'll sort out the cards. We'll take a look at all that stuff in just a bit. But we'll see basically how all the cards play out. So the cards are organized here via stats, and to represent damage, it's pretty neat. You just turn the card. We're not going to say that other thing that's copyrighted for other card systems, but we're going to turn the card or rotate the card to represent damage. But you'll have different things on there. So you'll have the name or type of the unit, their move rating, defense rating, morale, melee, charging if they do have a charge attack, and missile rating if they do have missile weapons. And then the way the game resolves a lot of the things, whether it's morale or damage, is through different icons that the cards will have on there. And so you might have two copies of a unit, but they'll have different icons, and that will represent their morale and other things like that. So, and then their actual big icon, we'll see that in just a second on the card, but that will be for determining battle results or damage results. And depending on how big or strong the unit is, they might be able to take one or more hits, sometimes not much at all. And as they take damage and you rotate, you'll see that their stats essentially start coming down quite a bit. So what does that look like then? So we'll take here our sort of generic Annuir and Pikemen. So these guys can move 1. They have a melee of 3, so not terrible. Defense of 3 as well. This particular card has a couple of good morale icons, so it's got 2 of the 3. And then the big icon in color there is the pennant. So now the pikemen are obviously good against horses, so or cavalry, cannot be charged, and then +1 to attacks and defense versus mounted units. So again, cards that have a charge rating can't use that against these guys, so they just have to use their melee, which definitely helps as well. And again, they're just straight up better against mounted units, so melee 4 and defense 4. And these guys, unfortunately, can only take 1 hit, but then they'll drop down to melee 2. Defense will stay the same. After that, if they take another hit, they're destroyed. So give you an example of a different type of card. So this is a very specialized one here, the Knights of Halen. Obviously going to be faster, much more melee, and much more defense. A charge value of 7, which is huge. And all 3 morale icons, they also happen to have the flag for their battle stat there, and then they ignore any fallback or rout results caused by magic. These guys can actually take a couple of hits as well. So, and then something fairly squishy, just to show you guys. So archers are actually pretty fast, move 2, defense 2, melee 2, so they can do a little bit of work, but not going to last long. Actually has 2 morale icons. This one has the shield, but missile value of 4, which is pretty cool, and +1 to missile attacks versus mounted units. So really a 5, but also these guys only take a single hit. And there's rules for goblins, or not orcs in this one, orogs, ogres, undead, and all kinds of other craziness. So really, really cool stuff here. So the way, and we're just going to kind of high level summarize here. for you guys. But basically, on the map, you'll have, essentially a mirrored image here, but you'll have your setup and the opponent will have their setup. You can actually put as many of your own units in one individual square as you want. So if you want to really just like concentrate in one area of the battlefield, you could, but you will likely then, get outflanked and just outmaneuvered. So, and not leave yourself with many like fallback or route spaces. So you do want to ideally control a little bit of battlefield to be able to possibly flee if some of your units start taking damage and need to fall back and stuff like that. There's also terrain cards that can affect things. We'll take a look at those in detail for you guys. And you got rules for PCs on the battlefield. We'll cover that one separately, but basically there are also some war magic cards that the PCs can use if you have wizards and priests and stuff like that. And some of the expansions add to that as well. Sequence of play is pretty simple. So basically attacker moves, and then the defender moves. So that goes back to the aggressors. And so like who's initiating the war or the battle, stuff like that. We'll cover that. Attack phase. So you do magic attacks first, then stationary missiles, resolve all charges, then resolve all melees, resolve moving missile attacks. We'll get to that. Then the morale phase. So routed units will flee. Units forced to fall back will do so. Routed units attempt morale checks, surrender or withdrawal if, one side basically calls it quits. And then you just repeat until, again, there is a victor or some sort of resolution to this. So movement. So again, you can move forwards, backwards, sideways, no diagonals though. And you can move through friendly forces if the terrain permits it. A unit can't move through an area occupied by enemies naturally, although it can move into the area in one round and leave the following as long as they're not engaged by the enemy. So a key thing there. Commander can move any or all of his units as they see fit, although units that are engaged can't move, obviously. Again, the attacker conducts all their moves first, then the defender, and so on and so forth. When units move into an area with enemy forces, the enemy decides how many of their units must meet the attack and become engaged. At least one unit must enter the battle, and the enemy must engage a number of units equal to the attacker's number of units. If the enemy's units outnumber the attacker's units, those extra units need not be engaged. Thus, it's possible to have engaged and disengaged in the same area. Engaged units are locked in battle and can't move until one side or the other is destroyed, routed, or forced to fall back. And then each time a new attacker moves into the area, again, an enemy has to engage if possible. Engaged forces can't do missiles or charges. They have to use their melee. But again, if you are charging in as a brand new combat, you can use your charge value for that first round, which is usually significantly higher. And missile troops are used to, if you were stationary as a missile troop, you can use sort of like a last stand shot before you have to then engage in melee. So usually if you're lucky on the cards, the resolution, you can maybe put a damage on an enemy before it gets to melee, because usually your archers are not going to be great at fighting. You got charges, again, special type of attack. We saw that with the cards. Reserve area, you can't move into the enemy's reserve, but you can send units to your own reserve, is the long and short of that. Attack phase, again, we'll cover that here in just a separate section, but basically you'll have your card and the opponent, and then it'll be your attack versus their defense. You'll look at one of the battle cards, compare your battle icons, and then just find the right column and look at the resolution. So from there, again, you got stationary missile attacks, charge attacks, melee, moving missile attacks. So any disengaged units that moved into the current round can fire at an enemy unit up to one area away. If the enemy is engaged with the friendly unit does also suffer the effects of that, so that can be nasty. Resolving attacks, again, we'll go through all of that, but basically it uses the battle card, so we'll take a look at this one here, but then we'll play out a short battle for you guys as well. So basically, again, you would take the attackers and the defenders' values, figure out the difference, and then you compare their icons, right? So the attacker would have the swords in this case, the defender the shield. The difference was -1, so that resulted in an F. So the attacker actually falls back. They did not do so well, but they didn't take damage, so that's something. But again, we'll get to that. So that doesn't mean also that the icons that's always going to be the same result with those units. Again, that's why you draw different battle cards and they'll have different results and things like that. So there's never really just a pure, this unit can never possibly damage another unit barring some very random and vague exceptions. But we have routes. So if you route, you do have to have a free space, even if there's friends there that would actually block you. And then you would have to test morale at the end to see if the unit sticks around, in short and sweet there. And basically, yeah, they do have to try and get to their reserve as fast as possible. If they don't, they stay in reserve until you pass morale finally. Fallback is easier. You just move back, and then you can act as normal following that. Morale checks, withdrawal and surrender. So again, we'll see how all that works. And ending the battle. So if no adjacent friendly province is available for the defeated forces to retreat, they would be destroyed. So let's get into that a little bit. So a battle ends when one commander surrenders or withdraws, or when all their forces have been destroyed or driven to the reserve. So there is, again, importance on maneuver, because you want to, if you can occupy the enemy's initial deployment areas and force them into the reserve, you can also just sort of cut the battlefield off from them, essentially. So enemy forces that survive the defeat by withdrawing from the battle are immediately returned to the province from where they came, or are driven into an adjacent friendly province if they were defending against an enemy attack. As we said, if there's no adjacent friendly province for the defeated forces to retreat, then they're just destroyed and hunted down. And again, if nobody fights, well, that could also happen. So basically, if both sides choose not to move in a round and no units are engaged, you roll a d10. On an even roll, the attacker chooses one of the defender's areas and forces the defender to advance some or all of the units there. The defender's choice, at least one area. The defender can be forced to abandon good terrain, but he can never be forced to abandon fortifications. On an odd roll, the defender may force the attacker to move units in the same manner. On a 9 or 10, the battle's just over, and an inconclusive result. So